Hello and welcome to the Global Innovation Design panel discussion, Professors Around the World, How to Teach a Global Course. I'm Louisa, I'm a GID second year, and GID from our point of view, from the London starting students, is a course where you start your first 2 terms off in London, then you go on to either Beijing or Tokyo for the second, Singapore or New York for the third, and then you finish your course back in London. So I'm joined today with a range of different professors that we learn with at the different institutions around the world. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Professor Masa Inakage. He's the Dean and Professor of Keio University Graduate School of Media Design in Yokohama, Japan. Welcome, Masa.
Thank you. So I'm the co-founder of the GID program and Dean and Professor at Keio. I'm a creator and I'm a dreamer.
Brilliant. Next up, we have Layla Sheldrick. She is the head of program of GID and a lecturer in industrial design from the Imperial College side of the London track. Welcome, Layla.
Thanks, Louisa. Excited to be here.
We've also got Pir Sadiq. He's an associate chair of the School of Art, Design and Media in Nanyang Technological University in Singapore.
Thank you, Louisa. Design does not think, designers do. And that has been my saying all this while. Right.
I love that sentiment, Pir. We've also got Matti Nyberg. She's the assistant professor and assistant chair of industrial design at the Pratt Institute in New York. Welcome, Matti.
Thank you, Louisa. My work focuses on the representation of culture through physical objects and storytelling.
Brilliant. And finally, we have another one of my own course leaders. We've got Gareth Loudon. He's the head of program for GID and IDE and a professor of creativity at the Royal College of Art. Thank you for joining us, Gareth.
Thanks, Louisa. Yeah, my interest obviously is in creativity and innovation, and my motivation more broadly in terms of the courses are sort of helping support and develop new innovators, the next generation of new innovators. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. So I thought to start us off, have any of you ever seen a project or something that's come out of the GID course that has been particularly exceptional and really stuck on your mind? I think, Layla, you might have had something to start us off with.
Yeah, so when we were asked about this, trying to pick a project is difficult. So I've picked Annie's work because for me, this was a real turning point in my understanding of GID. I feel like one of my biggest revelations was in GID, we have this term vision. And it's a really loaded word, and it's kind of a tricky thing for a European to hear. It has this really American sense that you have this vision that you kind of see through in the world, and it seemed like an odd thing for me. But this cohort and his cohort were kind of the first one to come through with this vision, and it gave birth to this incredible diversity of really personal work by asking people to focus on the things that they were passionate about, which has since become really core to the GID experience. And Annie's work not only kind of signified that, but also she was one of the first people to really begin, I think, for me, to spark this new way that we're seeing GID emerge as a place for people to work on things no one else has ever worked on before, in ways that no one else has ever worked before. So she was exploring her passions and developing new methodologies and carving a completely new path. And so this cohort and Annie's work was kind of the birthplace for me of some of the most exciting stuff that we're seeing now bedded into the DNA of GID a few years down the road.
That's really wonderful. It's really nice to hear about where these sorts of things come from, because I do find out of any of the educational institutions I've been to, I have never necessarily thought about how my work can be personal to me until I got to GID. And I certainly grappled a lot with the whole vision thing, especially in first year. And now I find myself in conversation with people outside of GID using the term vision as if it's a normal way to talk about design, because it suddenly makes so much more sense. Masa, did you have anything you wanted to share with us?
Sure. So this is my student, Charlotte Lin. When she was on the journey, she started to explore, and we encouraged our students to be very adventurous, to wander around cities, to discover many things. So she was very inspired by this kind of attitude, and started a project called Urban Wanderer. Instead of looking at a map and from location A to location B, what is the most efficient way to get there? She created a futuristic device, which is called Wanderer's Antenna. That what if we can wander around with this device, and the device actually take you to undiscovered locations in the city, so that instead of going to the same street over and over again, you will wander around the city and for adventure and discovery. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at the GID journey itself.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. I think it's super interesting, following on from Layla's point about bringing your personality and your personal vision into your projects, and how GID students do tend to be wanderers of all different types, whether it's globetrotting and wandering the world or just wondering about a lot of different things. And I feel like that's really reflected in this piece. Matty, did you have something for us to see?
Absolutely. So at Pratt, we really believe in object-centered design, and throughout the process we're always talking about research as making and reading and talking and processing, and Mairead really did a great job of bringing a project that she was really passionate about, that she had explored in an artistic way, she had explored in a psychological way, and brought all of that from a previous project to Pratt, and then really explored what does form, what does material, and how can we integrate objects into a therapy, and how we process our own psychological trauma, specifically related to women coming from abusive situations. And it was really beautiful to watch her engage with our 3D curriculum and our color curriculum, and integrate that into her vision project that you guys have been talking about. And it's a passion project that she's continued to work on, I believe.
That's really, really brilliant. I've definitely found myself working a lot more with form since I only just got back from Pratt about 2 weeks ago or so. And I think the designing for the mind and thinking about these sorts of things in an embodied object is something I've definitely taken away with me as well. Pierre, how about you? Have you got something for us to look at?
Yes, this project about refugees started me thinking about GID, because I was being approached at that time by RCA and Imperial. I was wondering what would that entail. But then we had a class in which we decided to talk about what is the present problem faced by Asia to start with. And the refugee was right on top. And the wonderful work done by students, and they found out that the first 24 hours into the refugee camp is when things can go wrong. People haven't been eating or drinking for several days, and they need nutrition. So we were having difficulty contacting people because we don't have access to, and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees somehow got into the act. And I started thinking that this needs a huge amount of effort internationally. And exactly at this time was when RCA and Imperial asked us to be part of GID. I thought this would be something that could continue, and I'm trying always to continue this with the students from GID, talk about issues, and this was very important. This was one of the most interesting one, because when someone comes in, especially if they're pregnant, this box is given to them, and it will sustain them for 24 hours, and then the doctors or caregivers can take care of them. That was I thought this project was very important in that respect.
Yeah, I think this is also so brilliant as an example of the kinds of things we do on GID, because you get a lot of people coming in with these huge questions. It's like, how do we solve the refugee crisis? And obviously, we're not going to design something that solves the refugee crisis, but trying to break that problem down into something smaller and be like, okay, how can I make the first 24 hours of living in a refugee camp more livable?
Yes.
that's a way that you can start breaking things down into things that we can actually start dealing with. Personally, for me, I think one of the most unexpected and exceptional things about GID is the people that we end up working with. And I find this, you hear a lot from alumni as well, that the best thing about GID are the people that you meet, the network that you make around the world. And I know, particularly maybe at the Pratt Institute, I've heard from Matty that GID students get a bit of a reputation. So I'm wondering to all of you, what is it like working with GID students?
Shall I start?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Louisa, it's interesting because when the first batch came, we were prepared but not prepared. Okay. First of all, the first difference was that the diversity of the students, number one. Number two, they entered into a school and a university in which asking questions and probing is not the first thing anyone does. And so whenever I asked any other professors, why don't you do something, they would come on, look, tell me what they're going to be doing so I can be prepared. So one of the things the student did was make the faculty be prepared to answer things. And that was a change that the GID students brought. And they continued to bring, always challenging us with questions, so much so that this year, two of us decided to teach just to manage this queries all the time. So this was our first introduction to GID, right?
Brilliant. Does anyone else have anything else to add, particularly about GID students? I know that at Pratt, we definitely had a bit of trouble because we wanted to study every single course, and we're not really used to having to be limited and having choice over what we get to do.
Yeah, I think over the time that I've been working with GID, I think we've learned to better prepare students for the experience at Pratt. I think the format of education has been something that we kind of have to address. The fact that American school systems are really about showing up and assignments, and really professors are pacing students. And that is something that GID students are not necessarily used to if they come from European schools, working with tutors, making their own meetings. So I find GID students are very they hold themselves accountable for their own experience. They're really reaching out. They're really going beyond the coursework. And sometimes that clashes with the amount of coursework that Pratt has. So I think the biggest struggle for GID students at Pratt is just being overwhelmed, like you mentioned, Louisa, with options, with resources, with exciting new things. And I think there is a certain amount of understanding that is now built into our welcoming to Pratt. So really understanding where the GID students are coming from, what are the assets there that they are bringing to Pratt that we can really build off of. And GID seminar really works at kind of merging those two things, a Pratt focused education and approach, but also GID students bringing these vision projects and like topics into kind of our world.
So then once we've done all these different kinds of schools and different kind of courses, I wonder if anyone notices any specific distance in their home students after they've done the different GID residencies in other countries.
That's an interesting question.
Do you feel, Layla and Gareth? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So for KO students, because we are design school, but not a traditional sense of design school, we are also technology school, business school, everything under one roof. So when our students go out to the journey and come back, they are equipped with traditional sense of design skills, which is lacking within our school. And that's a huge advantage to our entire program. Students can transfer their skills and learn experiences at Pratt and in London, both at RCA and Imperial. But likewise, I think when Pratt students and RCA Imperial students come to us, they will be immersed in our very unique setup of vertical collaboration, that it's not a solo project, but more encouraged to do collaboration and teamwork, and also expected to deliver some working prototype with technology embedded. So I think that kind of a difference between schools bring this GAG collaboration or consortium very strong and unique.
Yeah, we only had one group of ADM students come to London for various reasons before the pandemic strike. But then we do have a student who was part of that first batch. The thing about it is that our students are doing their final year projects, and they spend the first semester, and you can see a huge amount of difference in their thinking, whereas questions like, can I do this and can I do that, it turns around to, I am going to do this, because that's what they learned when they were in London, that you can go ahead and do it. So there's a huge difference in how they behave when they come back. It's pleasant surprise to the FYP supervisors. Similarly, when we have classes with Singapore students and GID students, there's always this conversation and chat that goes on, and that kind of gives a kind of confidence to the ADM students. Not that they lack confidence, just that when they get like-minded students who probe and they're not hesitant to ask the questions, they realize that's the way to go, and not write an email and ask, can I do this, can I do that? Approach is straightforward and ask. So many of the faculty who at the ADM they were trained everywhere in the world. They are used to that, and we're always hoping that our students will become that, and the GID students bring that to the table. That helps the students around.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think Mass's point as well, talking about when you're at KO, one of the best things that you can get is this technological knowledge. One of the things at Pratt that you get is this physical making. So I'm wondering, again, to the whole floor, but maybe specifically from Gareth, from an RCA point of view, what learning do you think that your institution specifically offers GID students that's unique to that place?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess I partly answer that and partly linked to the collaboration between the RCA and Imperial, which I think is very important. And yeah, the RCA brings, I guess, predominantly that arts side of things, with Imperial bringing the technical side. And I think that mix and that balance, both within the core team in London, to me is extremely important. So it's not about one or the other. I think it is, in terms of GID specifically, and what's really important for GID is that mix. But yeah, from the RCA side, I guess, and some things that are particularly important to me within that mix is that cultural aspect, that reflecting on role in societies, understanding culture, how to embed yourself in culture and translate those into design ideas and design opportunities. So I think obviously the practical skills in design and developing that element is important. But I guess the other thing I think is quite strong from an arts background, I guess it comes back to this idea of vision, I suppose, and the idea of finding your own path and developing your own way. I think that's probably comes more from an art school type background than you would associate with a technical type school. So I think that's very important ethos of the program that I think the RCA sort of feel strongly about too. So a mixture of different things.
Amazing. And Layla, from Imperial side of you, just while we're still focusing on London, what do you think Imperial College specifically brings to this collaboration?
I'd be more interested in asking the students that, I think. But my best answer, I think we have a lot of debates as a staff team, as Gareth was saying, about the collaboration. And so the first word that comes to mind, one that we're always using in front of the students, is rigor. But that's by no means to say that there's not rigor in an intuitive, creative process. There's loads. And so the rigor comes from both sides. But I think what we do at Imperial is those tools Massa was talking about, getting people to kind of build stuff with technology, to kind of take the fear away from starting to make things, and take the fear away from starting to understand technological concepts and emerging technologies and what they can mean, and build in rigor from the behavioral sciences particularly. We have a strong focus in GID in how do you pull from existing knowledge bases, how do you use established theories across different aspects of all of science, and how do you use that in your work. And so I think when I mean rigor, what I really mean is firm grounding, that we have GID students coming up with these big ideas, but they should be grounding it firmly on existing practice, on knowledge, that they know something from testing it themselves or from finding something that works by looking in the literature or by something else. And so I think this tends to be where the Imperial side comes in, is that firm grounding.
Can I make one extra comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one thing also, key element you'd also associate with RCA and probably most arts and design spaces is this not necessarily finding the one right answer. So this idea of exploration and creativity is enhanced significantly by taking that type of approach. It's not that there's not creativity in engineering technology, there is huge creativity. So it's not that creativity is just sitting within RCA. I think it sits within both institutions. But that's the element I think that the RCA brings, is that maybe change of mindset that traditionally is not taught in a more engineering type institution. That there's the exploration that links to vision, which I touched on before. But I think the creativity really does come from the mix of the two, and and rigor, as Leila talks about, is linked into that too. So it's that combination to me is very important.
Pierre, I would love to hear from you on this, because unfortunately I've never got to study with you. I've been on the Tokyo, New York track. So I'd really love to hear, what am I missing?
Right, this is interesting, isn't it? I was listening to Gareth and Tola and Leila as well. One of the things we decided to do, which was when we started communicating with the GID students, even before they come in, is that there's this incessant wanting to use technology, and they do all their background work to check out and say, oh, 3 of the 13 top researchers on AI is in NTU, and computer science and this and that. But what interesting about School of Art Design Media is that we centered around telling stories and narratives. So it kind of puts a break. And then we have this monk turned faculty in industrial design, product design. And I normally ask them to do an intense course on aesthetics in wood. And 30% of the students, it drives them up the wall. Yeah. Right. But after some time, after they see the exhibit, we always have an exhibition at the end of the programs, and it's joined together with the end of the semester show, and there's always the GID show as well. And you can see what happened there. There's a transformative thinking about what is an object from an Eastern point of view, and the monk, Dr. Chalit, will give his version of what is the value of wood and all that. Number one. Number two is that they were, as Mate put, they were trying to get into every engineering courses, and they were blocked. And only selected ones they can go, because the reasons, different reasons the university had. So then they come to know that there's a whole lot of equipment available in ADM that can be used. 3D printing to motion capture to highly advanced photography studio to whatever. And they started using that, and that was a big change from what is an Asian perspective. We felt that Singapore is in a very unique place where three dominant cultures, the Chinese, Indian, and the Malay Indonesian culture have congregated So, and English, as brought by the British, is the language. So, and then we formed our own culture, formed our own Singlish. So it's always fun to hear students talk Singlish after some time. So there was a good amount of cultural knowledge. It comes with the history of things, and then what do we think of design? And it does get some of the GID students into arguments and things like that, but that's good. And that was something probably you missed by not coming to NTU, right?
It sounds brilliant. Yeah, I think we're all very disappointed that none of us managed to make it there this year. From my point of view, I would definitely say that the RCA probably taught me how to think, and then Pratt taught me how to make that happen. KO taught me how to add functionality to it, and then Imperial taught me how to make sure that it actually works in the real world. And Pierre, you've brought some comments that really nicely move us onto our next section. So enough about GID specifically. Let's talk about global education.
Right.
So what do you think are the benefits of having a global education system? And also, what do you think of the drawbacks? I'd quite like to hear from you, Matty.
I mean, I think the obvious benefits are just the variety of perspectives that the students bring. And, you know, we find that it's not just about the 12 students that are visiting this semester, but it's about all of their engagements that they have while they're at Pratt with our faculty, with our home students, you know, our undergrads who would not have access to this experience still have the opportunity to meet students from these various design schools, various design perspectives, and also personal perspectives. You know, we don't have a lot of European students in Pratt, and students that are coming from RCA a lot of times come from a variety of countries in Europe, also different countries in Asia that we don't necessarily get students from. So just hearing about their perspective changes everyone's experience. You know, we can't, as designers, operate in a bubble anymore. So I think a global education is an obvious, you know, next everything. You know, how can we get high schools into this experience sooner rather than waiting until a master's program, right? We're so connected in every way. Why is our education system not built on, you know, flourishing in that environment? So I honestly, I'm not sure I can think of a drawback. You know, when you asked, I can only think of a drawback in our personal student body. We have a program that's really focused on building up skills over time. And the students that leave Pratt to go to these other institutions, they have very different experiences, which is great and broadens their perspective. But sometimes they feel like they missed out on their Pratt experience. So kind of balancing being really part of a strong community for a long period of time and building connections with each other and getting the opportunity to work with people longer term is maybe the only drawback I can see. But now with Zoom and everything, like, I know our students are still in connection with GID students who are no longer in New York or in the same country. So I don't know that I can say there's a drawback.
That's super interesting. Does anyone have anything to add here?
I think I absolutely agree with Matty that perspective is the word for the benefits in all aspects, from all directions, in your work, in your life, in the context, in all of it. I think I would add to that drawback of being one of the key challenges, I would say, is time, is how much time it takes to adjust to a new way of working and to allow that. It's a bit like when you're forming a team, it takes time to have the shock, to synthesize all the information you're seeing, and then to fold that into your practice and have it change you. And it takes time to have enough life experience before that happens to know how to do that well and to fold it into your practice. And so there are so many challenges in time in the GID experience, and moving around too quickly and not being able to spend enough time on one thing or another in order to build the skills that you want to. And I think that can translate out to, I know the question was about global education, but I think that translates out to that. And how do you have meaningful enough exchanges? You know, if it's just a weekend where you see new perspectives, is that going to change the way that you practice? If you go on a holiday somewhere, does that mean you understand that culture? Time is always hard.
You've brought me really nicely to one of my other questions. So one of the things we wanted to know is, how do you think students can ensure that they are actually engaging with the cultural context that they find themselves whilst they are studying and traveling?
Wow. You know, the thing about traveling versus studying and traveling is traveling, it's a window to something, right? Many times I find not just the GID students, but other students who come to study at ADM, at NTU, as well as in Singapore, is that they have framed up an idea of what Singapore is. And so what happens is all that is broken, first of all. And then one of the important thing about GID is that the diversity of students from South America to other parts of the world. So what we can do is relate something to a story or a culture or a behavior that has happened in Singapore, and then it allows for a conversation from each of their own background. So that frames an interesting question then is, okay, we're all facing a problem with something today, like ethics and robots and AI. What do you think? And then I'm from where we are, and many of us are talking about, has there been instances in the past in the mythological universe of Hinduism or Buddhism where there were beings that were not humans, and how did we behave? And yes, and that helped. And in the ADM's case, we also have art historians and historians who can expound on that. And that is something that the student, but you have to remember, we have to kind of slowly force them into that issue, because they are all in a hurry, as all of us have mentioned, and they were all interested in technology to start with. And we are trying to tell them technology can be, we agree with that, but you're sitting on technology, but these questions are so important. Take some time. And our students get to know that step by step at the third year to the fourth year. But GID especially is a singular element of a problem or an issue. How could we solve through these kind of cultural background that we have? Becomes an interesting topic for discussion. And if that happens in a very good manner, you can see the kind of energy that it brings to the students around.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super, super interesting, especially bringing in so much of the cultural background and how that then impacts the design work you end up doing. So I feel like KO does this in quite an interesting way. There was a class that we were offered, I think it was called Otaku Culture. And that class was basically just to try and bring you more into the culture of Japan. So I wonder, is there anything else you feel like you're doing at KO, or would you like to explain that? Or
Sure. So when we say global, it sometimes become a misleading word of we have everything the same wherever we go, versus we actually have different cultures, different everyday life, the value sets, and to be in a different location is really immerse yourself in a different setting of value sets and everyday life. And then by understanding it, it's not to contrast between which is better, but the difference, and identifying the difference and trying to adapt into that local culture is the ability for the next generation designers to have. And you can gain that skill by only being there, and you try yourself out of adapting and translating the idea for localities. So I think this kind of program is not a simple exchange program. It is a collection of different dots strategically put together as a one thread. And in doing so, at least the New York, London, and Tokyo triangle, we are having a regular faculty meeting to ensure that all this thread is not collapsing, but it's one thread, and then we can follow students throughout the journey. And so it's important to look at both global minded thinking, but also looking at the details of localities and trying to blend and be adaptive and flexible.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. And on the point of being adaptive and flexible, like for context, our year, the GID2s currently didn't actually go to most of the places we were meant to go. Luckily, we had online teaching from Zoom, and that was really interesting. But I think we did show quite a good amount of flexibility and adaptiveness in finding our own way to make sure that we were still engaging with different cultures and working with different places. And I think, well, on the London route of GID, we do a module called cultural translation, where we have to talk about how some of these learnings have made their way into our design practice. And I actually found it quite difficult to pinpoint anything specific about KO, about Pratt, about Japan, about Thailand, about New York that was affecting my design work. But what I did definitely notice was more the idea of subculture, and not necessarily looking at New York as this one culture of America or Japan as this one culture, and finding that within that there were lots of much smaller cultures that definitely had a much bigger impact on my design work, and thinking about how do you design for these specific people, especially more marginalized groups that aren't necessarily considered the major culture of a place. So we're just going to bring you on to the final part of our discussion. So we've talked about GID, we've talked about global education, but we'd really like to hear about all of you. So what do you do outside of GID, and what led you getting into global education as a field? And I'm going to start off with Layla, because I've heard her story before and it's fascinating.
Oh gosh, okay, so from the beginning then.
Pressure.
I studied design engineering as an undergrad, so I wanted to go and do engineering. I really liked that, but I felt really creatively void by the end of it. Like engineering, you're trained to converge on a solution, and actually there was very little design other than I knew really, really well how to make stuff by the end of it. And I had worked for a while and I'd understood that. So I did what the GID students do. I went to find some more input and at a master's level, and I found myself in northern Sweden at this incredible little design school with people from all around the world coming together and living their lives in this one building for the whole year. And it changed everything, changed the way I worked drastically in a way that I couldn't articulate at the time. But once I started working again and going back into practice, I could see it in all the aspects of what I do. I tried lots of different versions of work in industry. I tried a few different things in different places over the years, and then landed back doing my PhD because I was really passionate about sustainability. And it's really 10 years ago or more, it was really difficult to find a job in sustainable design. It wasn't something companies were doing. It was really hard. Now the whole game has changed, but I went back to university to do my PhD to figure out why nobody was doing sustainability when it seems like a very obvious thing. And so I began teaching because I was doing my PhD. I was in a university and they asked me to do it, and it just kind of snowballed from there, really. It's a job. I got bored of all the other jobs once the learning curve eased off, and it's impossible to be bored of this job. It's like constantly challenging in new and interesting ways. And it goes back to what Pira and Matty were saying about GID students at the beginning. It's like an incredible brain gym. Every single time you go into the studio and a new problem is thrown at you every 20 minutes and you have to try and figure something out. And so not only do I now get to train a small army of these incredible people, but it's like very good for me and for my practice and for helping me understand my research and all the other things that I do. So long answer, in my life outside of GID, I do research into sustainability still, but looking at futures and how people can think further ahead and use those as tools in their practice. And so that extends to consulting work, working with companies on how they put this into practice, but also kind of fundamentals and thinking about how design and engineering need to respond to some of these future challenges.
I think that's brilliant. I find listening to how Layla and one of our other tutors, John, got into this definitely made me feel really inspired to be here. Pier, as one of the latest additions to the GID program, how did you end up here? And do you feel like teaching the course has affected your own practice and your work in any way?
Right. Interesting. Yes, I was in Chennai, India, and I did not know how to become a designer. Okay. So the easiest thing that everybody was able to, I mean, you had to work hard for it. I studied mechanical engineering. Okay. It's a 5-year course from the old British School of Teaching. And now in retrospect, I enjoyed it, but I just was sulking for the first 2 years. Why did I get into this course, and why so much of mathematics? And result of it was I decided to be a vandal and started sketching on my desk. And interestingly, every time we have an exam, my desk used to get stolen to another classroom. Till one day, one of the professors who watched me and wanted to know what's going on, he was teaching about internal combustion engine, and I was sketching it in 3 dimensions. And he came by, and he said, "Come and see me in the room." I thought, this is it, 2 weeks suspension or whatever, you know. He called in and he said, "Have you heard of industrial design?" I said, "No." And he pulled out a small brochure from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. It said Industrial Design Center. And I read and started going to the library at the United States and the British Council Library, where they had some. Then I said, I have to go. But I didn't know that there were only 2 design schools in India at that time. And they only took 15 students each. And then I entered into this competitive world thinking that I can do everything. And then I went to IIT Bombay. There were 300, 400 students waiting for that 15 places. 3 days of whatever happened, I did very well. Then I started working as an industrial designer and moved to Singapore because you migrate because of 2 things. You find fortune or a woman, and I found a woman, and as a Singaporean, so I migrated to Singapore. I saw this as a green field, but something was missing in me. A transition from engineering towards design. I thought design was like the Adam's apple stuck here. Something else was missing. So I applied to Royal College of Art, and we had industrial design at that time, right? So I did my second master's at RCA, and came back and started a consultancy again after some time. Just like what Layla said, you encounter, sitting in Singapore, you only encounter global MNCs and companies and startups. When I started my design consultancy with a friend of mine, it was a whole world of startups and modems and this and that. So after some time, I got a bit tired. You kind of even out. That's when the School of Art, Design, Media was opening at NTU. And I saw that fits me well because it's an art, design, and media school within a technological university. I found it challenging, but they did lay the trap for me, and then they got me out because once the company I had founded became too big for me, we had to sell it, and they were waiting for me at the corner and said, "Why don't you join?" This happened in 2008. I enjoy every moment of it. Of course, I do my own research on urban transportation and all that. I do consulting work, but teaching about, making students think and narrate the things, work with material, that has been something that I had really not thought I would be doing, and I enjoy it every day. Right.
That's really, really wonderful to hear. So we have time left for just one more question, and then we're going to open up the floor. So if you're watching us from YouTube, it would be great if you could drop a question in the chat, and feel free to direct it towards a specific panelist if you're looking for a specific answer. But the last one from me, obviously, you believe that a global context is very important to our work, and that's why you're all teaching us here this. So I was wondering, how does a global context impact your work specifically? And I was thinking, Gareth, you might have an interesting answer to this one.
Well, I guess it impacts everybody's work, doesn't it? I guess my immediate reaction to that, everything we do, both in our lives, it impacts us, whether we pay attention to that or not, I think is probably the issue. So I guess in terms of my work, it's probably trying and create that positive change and understanding of that, and the global nature of things. Wanted to mention sort of more the global south and the role that maybe is often been ignored in these global discussions. And so a lot of my work has been sort of also somewhat linked to that and educating myself also of the issues there. So I think, yeah, the global context has impacted me over a long period of time. I, like Pia, married someone who was Malaysian, so I also lived in Singapore for over 9 years, and so yeah, seeing different cultures has impacted my work and my thinking. So yeah, I think those are the key things. But then also in terms of my work, I guess the other thing that's been a real influence is understanding the complexity and interconnectedness of things and decisions and strategies. And I think our sort of education system, certainly in the UK, has traditionally been quite discipline focused and not really been therefore very good to sort of address these global factors. So for me, it's been particularly interesting in how can we create structures, both in my research work and also within GID and innovation design engineering, which I also look after from the RCA side, is how can we really understand these sort of complex systems and complex cultural integration to come solutions that really have a positive impact. So that's my sort of motivation for work and the role. I think that global, everybody needs to understand that global integration and the impacts decisions have that people make sometimes naively and have negative consequences.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And what a wonderful point to finish us off on, which is that ultimately, after all this traveling the world and studying, the main thing we are all looking for is a spouse in another country. But seriously, that was really, really lovely to hear. And I think it's such a nice point that your work is going to have a global impact and the globe is going to have an impact on your work no matter what. So becoming aware of it and being able to use that in a positive sense, I think is really, really important. So we're now opening up to the floor, and the first question we have is from Marco Dare. So how do you imagine design education in the near future? I feel like, Massa, with your dream-driven design approach, do you have any big dreams for how design education could manifest itself?
So when KMD was launched, we were looking at designer's perspective, so design thinking approach as part of our methodology to look at the real world wicked problems and trying to solve today's problem creatively. Now we are more interested in designing something that's not about today, but about tomorrow. And especially during this pandemic, everyone is talking about what's post-pandemic. Are we going back to pre-COVID, or are we going to design something much better and sustainable? And the obvious answer to me is, let's design something that's more desirable. To me, a dream future is the way to look at things and able to envision the future that you want to be in and then work towards that ultimate goal. And so design education is not only about solving today's problem, but also have a new role of responsibility to design something that's much better than what we have today.
That's lovely. I think the idea of responsibility in design is such an important one that I hope we can start focusing on in all different facets. Does anyone have anything else to add on what you imagine the future of design education to be?
I'll just add the obvious, now that we are all comfortable teaching and learning over Zoom, and as a cohort of professors and those that teach, we have learned new techniques of how to kind of translate what would have been traditionally only experienced in a physical classroom into an online experience. I think Pratt working through making and objects, that was probably a huge struggle that we had to overcome. And how can we have that conversation about a three-dimensional object in a two-dimensional digital space? And I think now that we've had practice and we see the advantages of all these resources, there is a natural inclination to think about partnering, not only, that with involving hours of plane rides and money, but that we can collaborate in a digital space in really interesting ways.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's very excited to not just get to be flown out for the sake of a meeting anymore, and we don't necessarily have an excuse to take so many trips, but it's definitely better for the environment. So our next question coming from Sassy from the Tai Young Science Academy. A global design course works amazingly on the value of design projects that address global issues. If you were to extend it to a science or engineering curriculum, where and how would you start? I think Layla knows I'm about to aim this. No, Layla, go ahead.
The interesting part of extending it to science and engineering curriculum is that while science and engineering is very important, from a design projects, especially with national, global, or whatever issues in mind, getting the thoughts from science and engineering into a design thought process, which needs human-centric. I would not use user. Human-centric is the thing that we have to concentrate on. We are trying to do that at the NTU. One of the important things that we have realized is that we have to, in many ways, train the faculty in science and engineering to teach in a studio atmosphere where you are trying to impart knowledge in a different manner. And there's a huge difference when that happens, and you have science and engineering students coming into design projects versus if they had done it in the engineering or the science school. So there's a lot of things both of us have to learn from the design school as well as from the engineering and the science school about how to teach something in a manner that they can learn, and how do you occupy them and take them away from something that is their own comfort zone. Design student love to go to the 3D printer and do something, and the science student like to find out what is the theory behind it, so on and so forth. So how do you get them together? Making a team of students together has helped, and I think that's one interesting way that we can extend it to science and engineering.
Brilliant. Does anyone have anything to add?
Sure. Let me share a little bit about my graduate program at KO. So we always challenge our students asking, what is the social impact? Rather than, here's my new invented engineering solution, and that might be a viable academic contribution. But we're more interested in how that would possibly translate into solving some real world issues or advancing our society to the future. So having students to think about the relationship of what you're doing with the society at large is very important, and we use this terminology of social impact for that.
Yeah, I would actually completely agree. I would say, although GID is a design program, it is also a science and engineering program, and so we do a lot of this. And so I agree with Masa that it's context and asking people to put their ideas in context and feed that into the development process. But also, as we touched on earlier, directly fusing some divergent thinking in there and asking people to have these points where they stop and consider multiple options, rather than what tends to happen is pick an option and run with it. So thinking of multiple ways to solve something tends to be good brain exercise to get that thinking in there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So our final question from the floor from Ahad Mahmood is, what are the virtues and pitfalls of taking this multifaceted approach? And do you think that it's better to go deeper in one design methodology rather than to skim multiple? Lots of thinking faces here. Who's going to take this one?
I'll start. I think what I try to really embed in students, especially when you're really just starting a design career or design thinking or, a creative process, is that in education, it's really about just exposing you to lots of different ideas so that you can internalize what you find valuable and what works for you. I think more than ever, we're aware that people learn in different styles, have really kind of different overlapping interests, and it's no longer a really prescriptive, here's what you get. It's really about accepting that these overlays are what are going to lead us to, new things. So in our program, we spend the first 2 years really exposing students to as much as possible. So a lot of students, especially right now, seem to be really interested in getting deep into ideas. And I really urge them not to jump in too soon into one subject or into, getting every aspect of the design project in one output. It's really about kind of seeing where is it in the process that you find the most excitement? Because if you're not excited and you're not passionate, the project's not really going to have a powerful impact. So I think having this multifaceted approach is just giving our students the ability to design their own process.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I can add a bit to that. So Global Innovation Design Program is training innovators. Innovation is all about connecting dots, and dots could be many different design methodologies or skill sets. So the more dots you have within yourself, then it is you to connect different dots together for innovation.
Yeah, I agree with both of them because we're not skimming anything, but multifaceted approach actually helps when you are faced with the problems with have multifaceted problems, if I can say that, because suddenly you realize what you thought you skimmed gives you a wherewithal to look at it differently. And that's where I think one of you mentioned, probably Luisa, about subcultures. And you get sensitized to that context, and then the value propositions come out. At the end of the day, the methodology is the same. It's A to Z or A to M or A to Q, but there's a process by which you want to get a value proposition out. And that's more important. If the value proposition can be sustainability, a value proposition can be relocating things, a value proposition can be taking advantage of a new technology that has been innovated, and so on and so forth. So the more multifaceted you are in your approach, the better you're able to deal with it and be able to answer these awkward questions that may arise. And I think that's where many of us and many of you are very fortunate.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to bring us to the end of the panel now. And conveniently, Kathy asked almost exactly what I was going to go for. So in one sentence or in one word, if possible, what do you think the most important quality is to have as a global designer? And I want to hear from all of you.
Right. Okay, let me start from Singapore. One of them, from my experience, to be a global designer, you need to have two things at your fingertips. One is sensitivity and the other is sensibility. And if you can work your way around that, you would be a very successful global designer.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I support that. There's a famous quote I like from physicist David Bohm, and he says you need attention, awareness, and sensitivity to be creative. And that's a mantra that I follow. And I think it's important for global designer.
Brilliant.
I can add, actually, I would have answered this to one of the questions earlier about what's the best advice to give someone in a new culture is curiosity. Just like watching everything, recording it all and absorbing it all to the same effect.
I'll go back to talking about process, and I would just say, trust. Trust in the process, trust in your references and your resources, and you'll get to a great result.
Be adventurous and be explorer.
Courageous.
Amazing. And if I personally was going to give one to future GID students, it would definitely be adaptiveness and just being ready for nothing to be anything like you ever expect how it's going to be. So that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to Masa Inakage from Keio University, to Layla Sheldrick from Imperial College London, Piers Sardek from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, Matti Nyberg from the Pratt Institute, and Gareth Loudon from the Royal College of Art. Thank you all for joining us, and good day, good night, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.